Okay, so who decides what we should eat in Australia? We have local government organisations, we have national, and then there are international bodies. Obviously, the different bodies take care of different groups of people. So here's a long list of all the different government international bodies that are involved in making food choices for the population. Now we're going to go through them one by one so you don't have to click on all those links all at once. Now the World Health Organization, the WHO, you've probably seen lots about WHO on the news. So each country, there's 150 countries, headquarters in Switzerland, contribute health information from all over the world. It's governed by an executive board and the World Health Assembly. And they decide, based on all the evidence from all the different countries, what the global goal for health is. Now, health is not just diet with the WHO. Health also involves sanitation, children's health, infant mortality. They cover things like hygiene, clean water, all sorts of subjects, but nutrition is part of the World Health Organization's initiative. So WHO, their goal is to ensure that 1 billion more people have universal health coverage, to protect 1 billion more people from health emergencies and provide a further 1 billion people with better health and well-being. So they're really targeting half of the population of the earth. That's actually a fantastic and well-written goal, I think. Now, there's another organisation, Food and Agricultural Organisation, the FAO. This leads international efforts to defeat hunger. So the FAO is specifically about preventing hunger. There's 194 member states in 130 countries, and there's 7 different committees. Now, this goal is slightly different because it is just about food and agriculture, not hygiene, infant mortality, etc. The goal is to achieve food security for all and make sure people have regular access to enough high-quality food to lead active, healthy lives. And then there is our own NHMRC. So now we're talking about what goes on in Australia. How do we get Australian research? This is the primary funding body for research in Australia. It has academic representation. There's industry, so representatives from the food industry and representatives from the government. And the goal here is to achieve the best health outcomes for Australians. And this will, the health outcomes and the initiatives really depend on what the government have decided are the big health issues, and that will change with the different generations. At the moment, the big target is to prevent obesity. It's governed by a variety of entities, including committees, councils, and executive teams. And then we have the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. Now, there was a time when we had packaging, we had food packaging and there were no ingredients listed and no expiry dates. And yes, I do remember that. So I remember growing up in the 70s and 80s, and when you had some canned tomato soup, it just said tomato soup. There was not a list of 10 different preservatives that have been added to that. So we were quite naive in those days. I do remember, must have been around the mid-80s, I do remember when all of a sudden things had to have labels on them. And I remember that was on the tail end of perhaps an asthma, eczema, food allergy epidemic. And so the government obviously would have looked into this, and then all of a sudden legislation was passed. So in the food industry, you had to do labeling. So this organisation research all of the processing aids and the production of food so that it has to be labelled accordingly, and that includes colouring, preservatives and additives. And there are some cases where they have to reintroduce vitamins and minerals that have been lost through picking through harvesting and manufacture of the food, and orange juice is a fine example. So with orange juice, if it's going to be called a juice, it has to have a certain amount of vitamin C that was present at the time that it was juiced. So let's say originally your glass of orange juice had 25 milligrams of vitamin C, then that still has to be there in the container after it's been shipped to the supermarket, put in plastic bottles, and after you come home, that amount of vitamin C still has to be in there if they're going to call it orange juice. Otherwise, I believe it has to be called an orange drink. Okay, so you will find things like vitamin C added and also certain minerals added, like perhaps even salt is added because salt has been taken away through the manufacturing process. They also create labeling so that the food composition and any genetic modification has been included, or I would say if genetic modification has not been included. So you need a stamp from the Food Standards Organization to say this is GMO free. And various other labeling and packaging like expiry dates. And yes, there was a time where there were no expiry dates, and I remember that happening overnight. All of a sudden, all our food in the supermarket had an expiry date, like milk, and we never really grasped that food would go off. We just always smelt it or tasted it and decided ourselves whether it was not suitable for consumption. But all of a sudden, we were told that we could only drink milk to a certain point and then it had to be thrown out. I think probably around that time we had a big food wastage epidemic that started. The expiry dates must have caused supermarkets a giant headache, I'm sure. But if food is going to be shipped all around our country, then it's definitely a good idea. It's regulated by a board of members considered experts in their field. It also has a reference database which used to be called NUTAB, which has information on over 1,500 foods and over 256 nutrients per food. And the foods that are included in the food composition database tend to be those that are staple foods in our diet, like bread, milk, cheese, etc., or commonly used ingredients in other food. Different organisation, the CSIRO. Now, I grew up very close to a CSIRO plant, and quite a few of my friends' parents used to work at the CSIRO, so I used to hear about what these parents were researching when I was a child. So they do research on meat, do research on wool, do research on grains, do research on water and all sorts of things. So the primary function is research and application of results for the benefit of Australia only. This is not an international organisation. They have a nutrition department. So yes, they do research also in all sorts of areas of agriculture, but there is a nutrition component to the CSIRO, and at the moment they're researching an ultra low gluten barley study. Now, we don't have the results of that yet, but I do remember that sometime around the change of millennium, the CSIRO brought out a CSIRO cookbook, and that became a #1 bestseller. Now you're thinking, well, what was so amazing about this cookbook? Probably nothing that was incredibly new. Many of the suggestions in this cookbook were fairly sensible. It was sensible dietary advice. And remember, this might have come at the tail end of quite a lot of radical dieting. I remember that in the 90s we were doing some pretty extreme things with diet. We were on grape diets, and we were on fruit juice diets and all sorts of things. And the CSIRO came along as the voice of reason and said, look, let's get really balanced here and use scientific research. So a lot of people went on that diet at that time, and I have to say there's really nothing wrong with the CSIRO diet. It's not specific for certain diseases, but it is a very good, general, sensible diet for the average Australian. And then there's the Department of Health. I would think if you are going to graduate as a naturopath or a nutritionist, you may not necessarily have a lot to do with the Department of Health. But the Department of Health also has the Therapeutic Goods Administration, or the TGA. Now, the TGA is a big deal when it comes to natural therapies products. So when you go to a health food store, and many of you probably will work in a health food store, those products have to be usually assessed and regulated by the TGA. So whilst you don't think you'll have a lot to do with the Department of Health, you may have something to do with the TGA. The TGA can withdraw a natural medicine product if the claims are not founded. Some natural medicine products will make outrageous claims, and if the Therapeutic Goods Administration get onto it, it will be withdrawn from the shelf. Now, I used to work for a natural medicine company many years ago, 20 years ago, and I got lumped with the job of making some products pass the TGA. And that was a very detailed, very painstaking project that I was involved with. And I really didn't realize that every single word on a label has to be justified. Which is why if you get some vitamin C tablets, it will not say that this fixes your cold. It will say vitamin C, quote, shortens the length of a cold. So the Therapeutic Goods Administration will dictate the wording of every label on a health product. Now, there are some health products that slip through the cracks, and it is a matter of time before the TGA get a hold of it. Now, from my understanding, Australia has very strict legislation around natural therapies products over the counter, so the Australian government's quite tough on us, and the TGA are relatively brutal compared with other countries. And I know New Zealand, for example, and the US don't have such stringent measures with the TGA. So the Australian Government Department of Health aims to create policies and initiatives for the health of Australians. It provides grants for research. It does consultation with other bodies. It could be that the Department of Health are liaising with the CSIRO. It's the link between the public and other agencies. So it regulates our healthcare system. It also includes Medicare, and it does research. And the vision of the Department of Health is the following: better health and well-being for all Australians now and for future generations. So really the Department of Health are saying, let's improve our health. They're not making big claims that we're going to cure anything. It's just, let's work towards an improvement of existing health issues for Australians. The current initiatives are different to the initiatives that we had 10 years ago or even 30 years ago. At the moment, we have a global health initiative. It's a 10-year project to improve understanding of global health threats. This is particularly important now that we have a COVID crisis. It also does preventative health initiatives, and these are the ones that we often see in the media. And we all know the government's trying to reduce obesity, trying to reduce smoking, chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, and increase education in nutrition, mental health and exercise. Now again, this has changed in the generations. When I was a child, there was a government initiative called Life Be In It. And Life Be In It came together because the government discovered that we were getting lazy and we were getting overweight. And that may or may not have been the case compared to now, but in those days the government did a big push to get us all mobilised, so to get us exercising and get us off the couch. And so the government funded advertising, and that advertising went on for quite a long time. I would say at least 10 or 15 years of advertising for the Life Be In It campaign. So I grew up knowing that we shouldn't be sitting on the couch, we should be exercising regularly. Now, the initiatives have changed as the decades have gone on. The next initiative was probably the AIDS campaign. That was most of the 1980s. That was a very significant health campaign. And then we had the Quit Smoking campaign, which was probably the most of the 1990s. And then since then, it has really been about obesity and heart disease. But in more recent times, I'd have to say the last 10 years, there's been a big push by the government to address mental health. So depression, schizophrenia. We had all of the mental health services became reorganised and restructured. The disability area of disability became restructured. We took mental health patients out of institutions, or we deinstitutionalised them and put them in community living. And that exercise was a big strategy in improving mental health and bringing people with mental health issues into the community. Also identifying things like suicide, addiction, etc. And I think we'll always have initiatives about exercise, but I certainly think the last 10 years has been all about mental health. If you want to know what initiatives are going on in the Department of Health right now, there's the website. The DAA, the Dietitians Association of Australia. I am not a member of the DAA, but certainly it would be a good idea if you were studying nutrition. So they're the peak body for dietetic and nutritional professionals, and it has an 8-member board of directors and a CEO. What they're going to do is support their members. Now, when you qualify and you go into the world as a clinician, you have to be a member of an association, and there are several for nutritionists and naturopaths. Some associations just do one thing, like the Dietitians Association. Some organisations are an association with several modalities, so you really have to take your pick. If you do nutrition only, this is probably up there number one. So supporting members, advocating for the profession and building healthier communities. So when an association advocates for their profession, they represent that group of professionals in the media, and they also lobby the government. So you might wonder what the point is, but when there's an issue that has to be addressed as a nation of dietitians and nutritionists, you will get your association to advocate on your behalf. So they lobby, they try and change legislation, they try and get representation, and that's what you pay for. They might also help you do problem solving, they may provide education, etc., etc. Then there's ACNEM, the Australasian College of Nutritional Environmental Medicine. I have had a bit to do with ACNEM in my career. ACNEM train general practitioners and specialists. They might also train, say, chiropractors, physios, and different allied health. They train them in nutrition, but they also train them in natural medicine as well. So it says nutritional environmental medicine, but essentially they're training practitioners in integrative medicine. They're an independent, non-profit, evidence-based postgraduate training college for health professionals. So if you're a GP and you've always been let's say you're a bulk billing Medicare GP and you've become interested in natural medicine and nutrition, you would then do postgraduate training with ACNEM. And look, it could be something like a 2-year postgraduate qualification, but they also do very short courses and they do seminars and all sorts of things. If you wanted to see an integrative doctor, that integrative doctor will no doubt be an ACNEM trained doctor. If you're looking for doctors to refer your clients to, ACNEM have a website with a list of integrative doctors that they've trained. I have a lot of respect for ACNEM trained doctors and ACNEM in general. It's governed by a board of experienced industry professionals, and they aim to transform global health through science and education, which I know is quite similar to some of the other organisations. Their mission is to support and promote nutritional and environmental medicine through independent evidence-based education. Then there's the Nutrition Society of Australia. This is different to the Dietetic Association of Australia. This is a society of scientists and educators from lots of different nutrition-based disciplines. And their members include nutritionists, dietitians, GPs, nurses, scientists, vets, teachers, students, etc. There's voluntary registration aimed at encouraging high standards of professional training. Similarly, their mission is to produce the scientific value and relevance of nutrition in Australia. They are the peak community nutrition education body. They are a source of scientific information. So you might think at the end of your degree, well, that was great, I learned all this evidence-based medicine, but evidence-based medicine changes all the time. So what you learned in 2020 when you graduate is not going to be the same in 2030. So it's the job of these organisations that we're talking about to update information. So it may be that you get a client in 5 years' time, your client comes to you and says, well, why should I do this because there's no evidence? You can ring up these organisations and say, please help me. I have a client that needs scientific information on this particular issue. Can you help me? So that's their job, to help people like you. That's the benefit of having an association. Also, every association will produce educational material in the form of literature that's posted to you or emailed, or in the form of education. Nutrition Australia is the link between the policy makers, so the government, the media, the food industry, the educators like us, and the consumer. And their mission is to inspire and empower healthy eating for all Australians. So where do we find our nutritional information? You can find it from all of these sources that we've talked about, but we're suggesting this reference, Understanding Nutrition, 2019. So this is our go-to reference for this topic. So who do you think is responsible for making decisions about our health? Just remember that slide where we had the international organisations, we had the national organisations, and then we have perhaps local or statewide organisations. There's several stakeholders in making decisions about nutrition, and you need to understand where they all fit. They all have a role to play. Now, it's important to complete the post-class activity to further consolidate your learning, and that's what you'll be doing yourself. Now, just to summarise what we've done today, we've looked at all the natural medicine principles, and there's several of them. We've looked at why nutrition is important, the definitions of nutrition, including the nutrient reference values that the government give us. We've looked at the Australian Dietary Guidelines, which is that pie of all the different food. We've looked at all the different organisations that do research for us. Now in the next session, we'll be starting on macronutrients. So there are 4 macronutrients. There's carbohydrates and fibre, that's 2 macronutrients. Then we have lipids, then we have proteins, and then we have water. So each session we're doing macronutrients, and then we'll start on micronutrients. Okay, so that will probably take up several several sessions. So next time we're doing carbohydrates part 1. That's not fiber, it's just carbohydrates. Translated, we're studying sugar. Now here's a long list of references. So please, when it comes to doing your assignments, come back to the references at the end of every slide and have a look. All of the government organisations are there that we've spoken about. What else have we got? The different associations. We've got Paxton, Foundation of Naturopathic Nutrition. We've got Whitney et al. And then we've got the end. So thank you very much. We'll see you for the next session.